It was just another night on the road. I'd been a trucker for over 20 years, hauling freight coast to coast, crossing miles of endless highway in every kind of weather. I'd seen it all. The blizzards in the Rockies, the scorching heat of the desert, the rainstorms that pounded so hard you couldn't see 3 feet in front of you. But nothing prepared me for what I saw that night on Route 666. They call it the Devil's Highway, and I'd always laughed it off as just another creepy nickname. I'd driven that stretch of road a few times before, mostly just to shave off a couple of hours on my route. It's a lonely, desolate stretch, winding through miles of empty plains, with not a gas station or rest stop for miles. The kind of place that gives you the feeling you're the last person on Earth, even when you know that can't be true. But that night, it was different. I had just picked up a load in Arizona and was heading north, planning to drive through the night. The weather was clear, the sky cloudless and dark, the kind of night where the stars seem so bright. It's almost like they're watching you. I had the CB radio on low, just the usual chatter from other truckers and the steady hum of my rig's engine. Everything seemed normal, but as I got closer to Route 666, I felt a knot start to form in my gut. At first I tried to brush it off. Long hauls can mess with your head, make you paranoid, make you see things that aren't really there. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The mile markers along the highway flickered in the beam of my headlights, and I swore they were getting closer and closer together, almost like they were counting down to something. I shook my head, trying to snap out of it, when I saw it. Up ahead, right in the middle of the road, there was a figure standing still, like a deer caught in the headlights. I felt my blood run cold, and I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. I had seen plenty of hitchhikers and weirdos on the road, but this was different. The figure didn't move, didn't even flinch, just stood there, as if daring me to hit it. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands shaking, and aimed the beam out the windshield. The figure was tall and thin, almost skeletal, with long, lanky limbs that seemed to bend at unnatural angles. It was wearing something dark, almost like a cloak or a robe, and its face. I couldn't see its face. It was just a black void, like a shadow had taken the shape of a man and stepped out of the darkness. I tried to reach for the CB radio, but all I got was static, louder and louder, until it felt like my eardrums were going to burst. The figure didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with that empty face. I blinked, and for a split second, I thought I saw eyes, bright, burning eyes, like 2 red coals glowing in the darkness, but when I looked again, they were gone. Then it started to move. Not like a person would, but gliding, like it was floating just above the ground, getting closer and closer to my truck. I felt a surge of panic, my heart racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I fumbled with the flashlight, trying to keep the beam steady, but my hands were shaking too much. The figure kept coming, inching closer, and I could feel the cold seeping into the cab, like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. I don't know what made me do it, but I hit the horn, hoping to scare it off. But the sound seemed to die as soon as it left the truck. It was like the road had swallowed it whole, leaving me in silence, except for the static on the radio. The figure was almost at the hood of my truck now, and I could see its hands, long and thin, reaching out, like it was going to pull itself up onto the rig. That's when I panicked. I slammed the truck into reverse, my tires screeching as I tried to back away, but the figure just kept coming. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged, and I realized I was shaking, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I couldn't take my eyes off it, no matter how much I wanted to. It was like I was hypnotized, frozen in place, as it glided closer, those long, spindly hands reaching out for me. And then it was gone. Just like that. 1 second it was there, and the next, the road was empty. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring out at the empty stretch of highway, waiting for it to come back. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the stillness of the night, like nothing had ever happened. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I forced myself to start the truck and get moving. I didn't care where I was headed, as long as it was away from that place. I drove for hours, not daring to stop, until I saw the lights of a small diner on the side of the road. I pulled in, my hands still shaking, and stumbled inside, feeling like I'd just escaped from a nightmare. The waitress took one look at me and poured me a cup of coffee, like she'd seen it all before. I asked her if she'd heard of anything strange happening on Route 666, and she just gave me a sad, knowing smile. "You're not the first," she said, her voice low, "and you won't be the last. Some things out there just aren't meant to be understood." I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or my mind playing games on me after too many hours on the road. But every time I think about it, I can still see those burning eyes staring at me from the darkness, and I can still feel the cold creeping up my spine. I never drove that stretch of highway again, and I never will, because whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. It was supposed to be a routine haul, just another lonely night on the road, driving through the vast, empty stretches of the Southwest. I've been a trucker for over a decade, and I've always enjoyed the solitude, the endless black ribbon of highway stretching out in front of me, guiding me through the night. But that night was different. That night, I felt something in the air, something heavy and suffocating, like a storm that you can't quite see yet, but you can feel it closing in. I was on a familiar route, heading from Phoenix to El Paso, with a load of electronics, the kind of stuff that doesn't care if you're late, but the bosses do. So I was pushing through, keeping my eyes on the road, my mind wandering as the miles ticked by. The desert can be a beautiful place, but at night, it has a way of making you feel small, like you're the only person left in the world. The highway was empty, no headlights in the distance, no tail lights to chase. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the endless expanse of desert on either side. I was thinking about nothing in particular when I saw her, a figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light, a dark silhouette against the vast emptiness. I've seen my share of strange things out there on the road, coyotes, wild dogs, even the occasional drifter. But this was different. She was just standing there, not waving, not moving, just staring. I couldn't make out her face, but I could see that she was tall and slender, with long hair that seemed to sway in the wind. My gut told me to keep driving, but something about the way she stood there, alone in the darkness, made me slow down. As I got closer, she stepped forward, into the beam of my headlights, and I got a better look at her. She couldn't have been more than 20, wearing a thin, tattered dress that fluttered around her legs. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her skin looked pale, almost translucent in the harsh light. She looked like she was lost, or scared, or both. "Are you all right?" I called out, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the stillness. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her eyes wide and glassy. "I need a ride," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "My car. It broke down back there." She pointed back into the darkness, but there was nothing there, no car, no lights, just the empty road stretching back into the void. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep driving, to leave her there and get as far away as possible. But there was something in her eyes, something desperate and pleading, that made me ignore the warning bells going off in my head. I reached over and unlocked the passenger door, telling myself that I was doing the right thing, that I couldn't just leave her out there alone. She climbed in, sliding into the seat without a word, and I pulled back onto the highway, trying to shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. For a while, we drove in silence. I tried to make small talk, asking her where she was heading, but she didn't say much. Her answers were short, almost dismissive, like she was trying to avoid giving me any details. The silence between us grew heavier with every mile, and I could feel the tension building, pressing down on my chest. I glanced over at her, but she was staring straight ahead, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. I tried to convince myself that she was just scared, that she was in shock or something, but the way she was acting, it was starting to freak me out. After a while, she finally spoke again. "Turn here," she said, pointing to a narrow dirt road that branched off into the darkness. I looked at her, then back at the road. "There's nothing down there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should keep going, find a gas station or a truck stop. We can call for help there." Her head snapped around to look at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Her eyes, they weren't right. They were too dark, too hollow, like there was something missing behind them. "Turn here," she said again, her voice low and flat, like she was daring me to argue. My hands tightened on the steering wheel and I shook my head. "No," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're not going down there." For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes boring into mine, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Then, without warning, she leaned forward, her face inches from mine, and I saw her smile. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too sharp, like her mouth was stretching into a shape it wasn't meant to make. "You're going to regret that," she whispered, her breath cold against my skin. "You should have turned." I didn't wait to find out what she meant. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, the truck lurching forward as I sped past the dirt road, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. I didn't look back at her. I didn't want to see that smile again. For a few minutes, she didn't say anything, just sat there, her hands resting on her knees, her head tilted to one side, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Then she started to hum, a low, tuneless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice soft and sing-song, like she was enjoying a private joke. I didn't answer, didn't even look at her. I just kept my eyes on the road, praying that I'd see the lights of a town, a truck stop, anything. And then she started laughing. Not a normal laugh, but a low, rasping cackle that echoed through the cab, filling my head with a sound that felt like nails scraping against bone. "You can't escape," she said, her voice twisting into something dark and cold, like the wind whispering through a graveyard. "You're already mine." I glanced at the rearview mirror, hoping to see something. Another car, maybe, or a sign that I was getting close to civilization. But when I looked, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The road behind us was empty, but in the reflection, I could see her. She wasn't sitting in the passenger seat anymore. She was standing behind me, her hands resting on the back of my seat, her face inches from mine. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop, my heart hammering in my chest. When I turned around, the passenger seat was empty. the door slightly ajar, swinging open to the dark, silent desert beyond. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that open door, waiting for something to move, to show itself. But nothing did. The road was empty, the desert silent, and I was alone. I never saw her again, but sometimes when I'm driving that stretch of highway late at night, I hear a faint, distant laugh echoing through the darkness, and I know she's still out there, waiting for the next fool who stops. It happened on one of those cold, lonely nights, the kind where the road seems to stretch on forever, and all you have is the hum of the engine and your thoughts for company. I was on my usual route, hauling a load of refrigerated goods from Chicago to Denver. I'd done this drive 100 times before, knew every curve and bump, every rest stop along the way. But that night was different. That night, I made a mistake I'd regret for the rest of my life. I'd been driving for hours, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion setting in that makes your eyes feel heavy and your hands numb on the wheel. I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, with only the pine trees and the stars for company. It was just past midnight when I decided I needed to pull over and get some rest. I spotted a rest area off the highway, a small, unassuming place I'd driven past countless times, but never stopped at. Something about it looked different, though I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent lights flickered, casting odd, jagged shadows across the asphalt, or the way the air seemed to hang heavy with a kind of stillness that made my skin crawl. But I was too tired to care. I just needed to sleep. I pulled my rig to the far end of the lot, away from the other trucks. I wanted to be alone, just for a little while. As I stepped out of the cab, the cold hit me like a punch, a biting chill that made me shiver. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and headed towards the restroom, figuring I'd freshen up before crashing for a few hours. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just a whiff of something off. But as I got closer to the building, it grew stronger, more pungent. It was like a mix of decay and rust, the kind of stench that makes your stomach twist and your throat burn. I should have turned around right then and there, but I didn't. I told myself it was probably just a dead animal nearby. I didn't want to think about anything else it could be. The door to the restroom creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the silence. The light inside flickered, buzzing like an angry wasp, and I had to squint to see anything. The place was a mess. Cigarette butts scattered on the floor, paper towels clogging the sink, the air thick with damp and grime. I took a step inside, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just some poor guy who'd had too much to drink, passed out in one of the stalls. But then I noticed how he was slumped against the wall, his body twisted at an angle that no human body should be able to bend. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight over his bones like a sick, twisted mannequin. His clothes were torn and stained, his face frozen in a grimace of terror, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. For a moment, I just stood there, my brain struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Then the smell hit me again, stronger this time, a wave of rot and blood, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I took a step back, my hand flying to my mouth. And that's when I saw his eyes move. I swear to God, they moved, just a flicker, but enough to make my heart stop. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the edge of the sink, and nearly fell. The guy's eyes, they weren't dead. They were alive, staring right at me, and there was something wrong with them, something dark and hollow, like a black hole that could swallow you whole. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my whole body frozen in place, locked in those eyes. Then he made a sound, a low, guttural growl like an animal. It started in his throat, then grew louder, vibrating through the walls, making the lights flicker even more. His mouth opened, wider than should have been possible, and I saw his teeth, sharp and jagged, stained with something dark. He started to move, his limbs jerking and twitching, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings, and I realized with a jolt of horror that he was trying to stand up. I don't know how I found the strength to move, but somehow I did. I turned and ran, bolting through the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I could still hear that growl echoing behind me, louder now, almost like a roar. I didn't stop to look back. I just ran, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, my legs burning as I sprinted across the parking lot. I reached my truck and scrambled inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. I was shaking so hard I could barely get the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, tearing out of that rest stop as fast as I could. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing chasing me. But the lot was empty, just a dark, silent stretch of asphalt disappearing behind me. But as I sped down the highway, trying to put as much distance between me and that place as possible, I saw something in the corner of my eye. In the side mirror, just for a second, I saw a face, pale and twisted, with eyes like black holes, staring at me from the shadows of the trailer. And then it was gone. I didn't stop driving until I reached Denver, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, my heart pounding like a drum. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that, too afraid of what I might see if I closed my eyes. I've never been back to that rest stop, and I never will. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on the road, I think I can still hear that growl, low and rumbling, like a storm on the horizon, getting closer. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't want to know. All I know is that something was there, something that shouldn't be, something that's still out there, lurking in the dark, waiting. And every time I see a rest stop, I drive right past it, because I know, deep down, in the pit of my gut, that it's still waiting for me.